3 weeks into his new life, Mark learned that hunger was a teacher more demanding than any university professor. It started as a hollow feeling, then grew into a gnawing presence that colored every decision. Where to find food, when to eat, how to make a dollar stretch across 3 meals or one meal across 3 days. The Pioneer Square area had its own ecosystem, he discovered, hierarchies and territories as complex as any corporate structure. The veterans held the best corners, spots with enough foot traffic to generate charity, but not so much visibility as to attract police attention. The newcomers got the scraps doorways that smelled like urine intersections where commuters avoided eye contact, the spaces between spaces where society preferred its problems to remain invisible. Mark's first teacher was a woman named Rosa Martinez, though she'd been Rosa Delgado before life took a sledgehammer to her carefully constructed world. She found him on his fourth night shivering in an alcove behind Pike Place Market, trying to make sense of a city that seemed designed to erase people like him. "You're doing it wrong," she said without preamble, her voice carrying traces of an accent that spoke of warmer places and better times. Mark looked up from the soggy cardboard he'd been arranging into something resembling the bed. Rosa was maybe 50, with steel gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that missed nothing. Her clothes were clean but worn, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd learned to navigate systems others couldn't see. Doing what wrong? All of it. The way you're sitting, the way you're looking at people, the way you're breathing. Rosa settled beside him with the fluid motion of someone whose joints had learned to accommodate concrete. "You're broadcasting that you don't belong here. Makes people uncomfortable. Uncomfortable people don't help. And you do belong here." Rosa's laugh was sharp but not unkind. "Nobody belongs here, mijo, but some of us know how to make it work anyway." She taught him the rules that weren't written anywhere but governed everything. How to approach strangers without triggering their fight-or-flight response. Which businesses would let you use their restrooms and which would call the security before you made it through the door. The locations of free meals and the unspoken protocols for claiming them. The key, Rosa explained as they walked toward the Union Gospel Mission for dinner, is to be grateful but not desperate, polite but not subservient. People want to help, but they also want to feel good about helping. Give them that. Mark absorbed every lesson with the intensity of a student cramming for finals, though he couldn't remember ever being in school. Something about Rosa's teaching style felt familiar, like he'd learned complex systems before, just in different contexts. His second teacher was James Jazz Williams, a saxophone player whose music could make angels weep or demons dance, depending on his mood and the weather. Jazz was thin as a reed instrument, all sharp angles and nervous energy, with skin the color of dark chocolate and hands that moved like they were conducting invisible orchestras. "Music tells stories," Jazz explained one evening as they sat beside Elliott at Bay, watching ferries carry commuters back to their warm houses and predictable lives. "Same with people. Everyone's got a song they're singing, even when they don't know the words." He played a few bars of something melancholy and beautiful notes that seemed to capture the loneliness of streetlights reflecting off wet pavement. "What's my song?" Mark asked. Jazz studied him with eyes that had seen too much and forgiven more than they should have. "You're still figuring that out, but it's not a simple tune. Got some classical training in there, some jazz, improvisation, definitely some blues. Complex composition, my man. The kind that takes time to appreciate." Jazz had been homeless for 3 years, ever since a drug conviction made it impossible to find steady work as a music teacher. He'd had a master's degree from Berklee College of Music, a wife who played violin for the Seattle Symphony, and 2 daughters who'd called him daddy and meant it. "The thing about falling," Jazz said, fingering a particularly complicated riff, "is that it teaches you things about yourself you never knew when you were flying. Some people discover they've got wings. Others learn they bounce pretty good. Which are you?" "Still finding out, but I'm thinking maybe I'm the kind who learns to sing while he's falling." Mark's third teacher was Dr. Sarah Kim, though she insisted everyone call her Doc Sarah. She ran a mobile medical clinic that visited homeless encampments twice a week, bringing basic health care to people the system had forgotten. She was Korean-American, probably 35, with the kind of precise beauty that spoke of good genetics and better self-discipline. Doc Sarah treated Mark's lingering injuries from the crash. Bruised ribs that hadn't healed properly, a persistent cough that rattled in his chest like loose change. But it was her questions that proved most therapeutic. Memory loss can be temporary, she explained as she examined the scar on his forehead where he'd hit the Tesla steering wheel. Trauma does strange things to the brain. Sometimes it's protecting you from things you're not ready to remember. What if I don't want to remember? Doc Sarah's hands stilled in their examination. That's not really your choice to make. Memory has its own timeline, its own purposes. Your job is to be ready when it comes back. She never asked how he'd gotten his injuries or why a man with his vocabulary and bearing had ended up on the streets. In Doc Sarah's world, everyone deserved medical care regardless of their story. But Mark caught her watching him, sometimes with an expression he couldn't quite identify. Not pity, not curiosity, but something that felt like recognition. It was Doc Sarah who noticed his unusual facility with technology. While other people in the camp struggled with smartphones and tablets, Mark seemed to intuitively understand how systems worked. He could troubleshoot problems, optimize settings, even write basic code when someone needed a simple automation. You've done this before, she observed one evening as Mark helped her input data from the day's patient visits. His fingers moved across the keyboard like a pianist performing a familiar sonata. I don't remember. Your hands remember. Your mind remembers. It's just buried under whatever happened to you. That night, Mark lay on his cardboard bed thinking about muscle memory and the stories bodies told. His hands knew keyboards, but they also knew violins. He discovered that when 3 teenagers tried to rob him near the waterfront. The movements had been automatic efficient, ending the confrontation before it could properly begin. He knew how to read financial statements, though he couldn't remember studying business. He understood complex systems and networks, though he had no recollection of formal training. Most strangely, he found himself drawn to news about technology companies, particularly one called Neuralink Dynamics, though he couldn't explain why their developments felt so familiar. 6 weeks into his new life, Mark had learned to navigate the invisible city that existed beneath Seattle's polished surface. He knew which dumpsters behind high-end restaurants yielded the best meals, which security guards could be reasoned with, which cops would hassle you, and which would leave you alone if you weren't causing trouble. But he still didn't know who he'd been before the river washed away his past. That changed on a Tuesday morning in late October when he walked past an electronics store and saw a news report that made his blood freeze in his veins. On the screen, a man in an expensive suit was announcing Neuralink Dynamics' revolutionary breakthrough Oracle and AI system that could predict human behavior with unprecedented accuracy. The man was speaking at what looked like a major technology conference, his words carrying the weight of someone accustomed to changing the world with casual pronouncements. Oracle represents the future of human-computer interaction, the man said. His name appeared on screen, David Park, CEO of Neuralink Dynamics. This technology will revolutionize everything from marketing to mental health treatment. Mark's hands began to shake. Oracle, that word again, the one from the business card he'd found in his pocket. But it wasn't just familiar now, it was wrong. Terribly, fundamentally wrong. As David Park continued his presentation, Mark could see the flaws in the system architecture, the security vulnerabilities, the dangerous shortcuts that had been taken to rush the product to market. Oracle wasn't just imperfect. It was weaponized, designed to influence, rather than predict, to control, rather than serve. And somehow, impossibly, Mark knew exactly how to fix it. The memories came flooding back in pieces like a dam bursting in slow motion. Images of late nights spent coding of architectural drawings that mapped neural pathways of a vision for technology that would help rather than manipulate humanity. His name was Marcus Chen. He had built Neuralink Dynamics from nothing. Oracle was his creation, his masterpiece, his gift to a world that desperately needed tools for healing rather than weapons for control. And someone had stolen it, corrupted it, turned his dream into their nightmare. Marcus, whoever he was now, stood on the sidewalk as pedestrians flowed around him like water around a stone. In the electronics store window, David Park was fielding questions from reporters, his face a mask of confident competence. Behind him stood a woman in black, elegant, poised, playing the role of the grieving widow with Academy Award precision. Katherine, his wife, the woman who had promised to love and cherish him through better and worse in sickness and in health till death did them part. Apparently, death hadn't been willing to wait for natural causes. Marcus touched the key in his pocket, the only thing besides the Oracle business card that had survived his journey down the river. Suddenly, he knew what had opened. Not just a door, but a path back to everything he'd lost, everything he'd need to reclaim. But first, he had to decide who he wanted to be: Marcus Chen, the dead CEO whose empire had been stolen, or Mark, the homeless man who'd learned to see the world from the bottom up. Looking at his reflection in the electronics store window, hollow cheeks, unkempt beard, clothes that smelled like the streets, Marcus realized the choice wasn't either or. He was both, and that made him more dangerous than either identity could have been alone. Rosa found him there an hour later, still staring at the blank screen where David Park's presentation had been replaced by morning cartoons. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. Marcus turned to face the woman who'd taught him how to be invisible. "Something like that. Rosa, how much do you know about computer programming?" She raised an eyebrow. "Enough. I used to write code before life happened." "Why Pamayu?" "Because I think it's time I remembered how to be someone who could fight back." Rosa studied his face for a long moment, seeing something there that hadn't been present before. Purpose, maybe, or possibly just the kind of anger that could move the mountains if properly focused. "What kind of fight are we talking about?" Marcus looked back at the electronics store where morning shoppers were browsing tablets and smartphones, blissfully unaware that their private thoughts were being processed by systems designed to manipulate their deepest fears and desires. "The kind where we save the world," he said, "starting with taking it back from the people who stole it." The abandoned warehouse in Georgetown had been empty for 3 years, ever since the last tech startup to rent it burned through venture capital faster than a Tesla through battery charge. Now it served as shelter for Seattle's invisible population, people who'd fallen through society's cracks and learned to make homes in the spaces between official recognition. Marcus stood in what had once been a conference room, studying the whiteboard he'd salvaged from a dumpster behind a failed consulting firm. Equations and diagrams covered every inch of the surface, mapping out Oracle's true architecture versus the bastardized version David was preparing to unleash on the world. "You sure about this?" Rosa asked from the doorway. She'd been watching him work for 3 days straight, surviving on coffee and determination, filling notebook after notebook with code fragments and system vulnerabilities. "Oracle isn't just surveillance software," Marcus said without looking up from his calculations. "The version David's built can influence decision-making by manipulating the information feeds people see. Social media, news articles, even search results. It can customize everything to push specific behavioral outcomes." Jazz looked up from the corner where he'd been tuning his saxophone. "Sounds like science fiction." 3 months ago, I would have agreed with you." Marcus capped his marker and turned to face the small group that had gathered around his impossible story. "But I built the foundation, the core neural networks, the behavioral prediction algorithms. What David's done is weaponize it." Dr. Sarah Kim entered carrying a box of medical supplies and a laptop bag. She'd been documenting everything, not just Marcus's memories as they returned, but the evidence they were uncovering about Neuralink's true activities. "I got into their personnel records," she announced, setting her laptop on a makeshift table constructed from sawhorses and plywood. "David's hired 12 people in the last month, all of them with backgrounds in psychological warfare or social media manipulation." Marcus felt the familiar chill that came with each new revelation about how thoroughly his life's work had been corrupted. "Show me." The files Sarah had accessed painted a picture of systematic infiltration. David hadn't just stolen Marcus's company. He'd been building toward this moment for years, carefully positioning assets and eliminating obstacles. "Look at this," Sarah said, pulling up an encrypted email thread. "David's been in contact with a company called Meridian Analytics for 18 months. They specialize in behavioral modification through targeted information delivery. Basically, they're propaganda specialists for the digital age." Rosa leaned over Sarah's shoulder, her programmer's eye catching details others might miss. "These timestamps. Some of these emails are from before Marcus's accident. David was planning this while Marcus was still alive." The weight of betrayal settled heavier on Marcus's shoulders. David hadn't just taken advantage of an opportunity. He'd created the opportunity, methodically destroying everything Marcus had built while smiling and calling him old friend. "There's more." Sarah continued scrolling through financial records. Catherine's been funneling money through a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Over $40 million in the last 6 months. Marcus stared at the numbers on screen, each transaction a small knife in his back. $40 million. Enough to disappear forever to buy new identities and start fresh somewhere with no extradition treaties. They're not planning to run Oracle for profit, he realized. They're planning to sell it and run. Jazz set down his saxophone, the mood in the room shifting from investigative to urgent. Run where somewhere they can't be touched. David's got connections in Shanghai through his father's business interests. Catherine's been learning Mandarin for the past year. I thought it was just another hobby. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. The rushed timeline for Oracle's launch, the systematic elimination of loyal employees, the careful positioning of assets in offshore accounts. David and Katherine had been planning to gut Neuralink Dynamics and disappear with both the technology and the profits. Marcus's apparent death had simply accelerated their timeline. We need to get into the Neuralink building, Marcus said. I need to see what they've done to Oracle's core systems. That's suicide, Rosa pointed out. Security will recognize you the moment you walk through the door. Not if I don't look like Marcus Chen anymore. Sarah studied his face with clinical interest. The beard and weight loss have already changed your appearance significantly. With the right clothes, different posture, maybe some temporary hair dye. It's not just about looking different, Jazz interrupted. You got to be different. Move different. Talk different. Think different. You've been living on the streets for 2 months now. You learned how to be invisible. Use that. Marcus nodded slowly. Jazz was right. His time as Mark had taught him things Marcus Chen had never known. How to read people's body language. How to become forgettable. How to navigate systems from the outside rather than the inside. I'll need help, Marcus said. Someone on the inside. Already working on it, Sarah replied, pulling up another file on her laptop. There's a cleaning crew that works the Neuralink building nights. I treated one of the crew chiefs last month, Miguel Santos. His daughter needs surgery they can't afford. The plan began taking shape over the next several hours. Miguel would get Marcus inside during the overnight cleaning shift. Rosa would provide technical support using her hacking skills to disable security cameras and unlock doors. Jazz would create a distraction if things went wrong. Few things drew attention like a talented street musician playing in unexpected places. Dr. Sarah would coordinate from their warehouse base, monitoring police frequencies and tracking David and Catherine's movements through social media and credit card records. But as the sun set over Elliott Bay and they prepared to attempt something that could land them all in federal prison, Marcus realized they were missing a crucial element. We need someone who understands the political implications, he said. Oracle isn't just a technology threat, it's a national security issue. If David sells this to foreign interests, I might know someone, Rosa said quietly. My brother Luis works for the FBI's cybercrime division. We haven't spoken in 5 years, not since I got arrested for hacking defense contractors. But if the threat is big enough, Marcus looked around the room at the unlikely team he'd assembled. A homeless former engineer, a street musician with a criminal record, a volunteer doctor with access to medical databases, and now potentially a federal agent with a grudge against his own sister. This is insane, he said. Most worthwhile things are upkeep, Jazz replied, checking the time on a phone he'd found in a taxi. Miguel's crew starts work in 3 hours. You ready to be dead man walking? Marcus touched the key in his pocket, the one that would open his private lab in the Neuralink building, assuming David hadn't changed the locks. Everything depended on whether enough of the old systems remained intact for him to access Oracle's source code. Ready as I'll ever be. Miguel Santos was 62 years old with hands that knew every surface in the Neuralink building and eyes that had learned not to see things that weren't his business. But when Dr. Sarah had explained what Marcus needed, Miguel's carefully cultivated blindness had given way to something approaching anger. I clean up after rich people all my life, he'd said in accented English that carried the weight of decades. They make messes, I make them disappear. But this is different kind of mess. Now at 2:17 a.m., Miguel led Marcus through the service entrance like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Marcus wore coveralls that smelled like industrial disinfectant and carried a mop bucket that Rosa had fitted with a hidden laptop and wireless transmitter. Security makes rounds every 40 minutes, Miguel whispered as they entered the freight elevator. Cameras on floors 3, 7, and 12 have blind spots near the supply closets. Your laboratory is on 1515, Marcus confirmed, though calling it his laboratory felt strange. It had been his sanctuary, once the place where he'd conceived Oracle and spent countless nights refining its architecture. Now it was enemy territory. The elevator carried them up through floors of darkened offices and sleeping computers. Marcus felt like a ghost haunting his own life, invisible to the systems he'd helped design. The building's security network didn't recognize him as Marcus Chen because Marcus Chen was dead, mourned and buried and officially erased from all personnel databases. Floor 15 looked exactly as he remembered, except for the new security cameras David had installed. Rosa's voice crackled through the earpiece Miguel had given him. I'm in their system. Cameras are showing loop footage from last Tuesday. You've got maybe 20 minutes before someone notices the pattern. Marcus nodded to Miguel, who continued down the hallway with his cleaning cart while Marcus slipped into an alcove near the laboratory door. The key from his pocket felt warm in his hand, like it was eager to open doors that had been closed too long. The lock turned smoothly, and Marcus stepped into his former sanctuary for the first time since the night of his death. Everything was wrong. His personal computers had been removed, replaced with standard-issue terminals that hummed with corporate compliance. The whiteboards where he'd sketched breakthrough concepts had been erased and filled with project timelines and budget projections. Even the coffee maker, his beloved Italian espresso machine that had fueled countless late-night coding sessions, had been replaced with a generic office model. But the hidden server rack behind the false wall was still there, protected by biometric locks that David probably didn't know existed. Marcus pressed his thumb to the scanner, held his breath, and nearly cried with relief when the green light flashed. Oracle's true source code was intact. Marcus plugged Rosa's laptop into the server and began downloading everything. Terabytes of data algorithms that represented 5 years of his life, the digital DNA of a system that could either save or damn humanity, depending on who controlled it. How we doing in there? Rosa's voice in his earpiece. Getting everything. But Rosa, this is worse than we thought. David's not bush selling Oracle. He's already sold it. Look at these access logs. Marcus's fingers flew across the keyboard, following digital breadcrumbs that painted a horrifying picture. Oracle wasn't in beta testing. It was already operational, already influencing information feeds for nearly 10 million users across 17 countries. Jesus, Rosa breathed as the data reached for her warehouse computer. They're running live behavioral modification experiments. Social media manipulation, news filtering, even dating app algorithms. They're not just predicting human behavior, they're programming it. Marcus felt sick. His creation, his gift to humanity, was being used to turn people into puppets. Every recommendation, every news article, every connection suggestion was being filtered through Oracle's corruption to push specific outcomes. I'm seeing purchase decisions, voting patterns, even relationship choices being influenced. Rosa continued. This isn't just surveillance, it's mind control on a massive scale. Can you trace who's buying the data? Working on it. Got partial records here. Government agencies from at least 6 countries. Private military contractors. Something called the Collective Influence Project that I can't get any information about. Marcus was downloading the last of the source code when he heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy boots moving with purpose. Not Miguel's soft-soled cleaning shoes, but the determined stride of someone looking for trouble. Company, he whispered into his earpiece. Security's not due for another 15 minutes, Rosa replied, tension creeping into her voice. The footsteps stopped directly outside the laboratory door. Marcus held his breath, watching the download progress bar crawl toward completion. 87%, 88%. The laptop's fan hummed quietly, but in the silence it sounded like a jet engine. Someone tried the door handle. Marcus had locked it behind him, but locks were only suggestions to people with the right tools and motivation. He could hear metal scraping against metal, the distinctive sound of someone picking a lock with professional efficiency. 93%. Rosa, how much longer? Almost done, maybe 30 seconds. The lock clicked open. Marcus barely had time to duck behind his old desk before the door swung open and light from the hallway spilled into the darkened laboratory. A figure entered, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the fluid grace of someone comfortable with violence. Not security. This was something else entirely. The man switched on a small flashlight and began methodically searching the room. Professional, thorough, someone who knew exactly what he was looking for and wouldn't be satisfied until he found it. 98%. The intruder's flashlight beam swept across the room, probing shadows and corners with systematic precision. Marcus pressed himself against the floor, trying to become one with the industrial carpeting as the light passed inches above his head. 99%. The laptop chimed softly, indicating the download was complete. The flashlight beam snapped toward the sound like a striking snake. Marcus grabbed the laptop and rolled sideways just as the intruder rounded the desk. For a moment, their eyes met across the darkened laboratory. Marcus's wide with desperation, the stranger's calm with professional interest. Then Marcus was moving muscle memory from his forgotten past taking over. He feinted left, then broke right toward the door, clutching the laptop like it contained the secrets of the universe, which in a way it did. The intruder lunged, but Marcus was already through the doorway and running down the hall toward the emergency stairs. Behind him, he heard the distinctive sound of a radio crackling to life. Target acquired. Subject is alive and mobile. Repeat, Marcus Chen is alive and in the building. Marcus's blood turned to ice water. They knew. Somehow David and Katherine knew he'd survived, knew he was coming for them, knew exactly who they were dealing with. Which meant this had never been about stealing Oracle. It had been about drawing him out of hiding. Marcus burst through the emergency stairwell door just as Rosa's voice exploded in his earpiece. Get out of there now! Building's going into lockdown. 15 floors down, with professional killers between him and freedom, carrying the only evidence that could expose a conspiracy to reprogram human civilization. Marcus looked down the stairwell, then at the laptop in his hands, then made the kind of decision that separated the living from the dead. He started running. The emergency stairs echoed with Marcus's footsteps as he descended 3 steps at a time, the laptop clutched against his chest like a shield that might stop bullets. Above him, other footsteps began their pursuit. Multiple sets coordinated, closing the distance with mechanical precision. Rosa, how many exits? Marcus gasped into his earpiece. 3. Main lobby's already sealed. Service entrance where you came in is compromised. Your best bet is the loading dock on sublevel B. Marcus reached the 10th floor landing and risked a glance upward. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness above him, accompanied by the steady rhythm of pursuit. Professional hunters who knew their prey was trapped in a vertical maze with limited escape routes. How do I get to B level? Keep going down past the ground floor. But Marcus, there's something else. I'm reading thermal signatures throughout the building. They've got teams positioned at every exit. The truth hit Marcus like a physical blow. This wasn't a security response to an unexpected intruder. This was a carefully orchestrated trap planned in advance, designed to capture or kill someone they'd been expecting. They'd known he was alive, known he would come for Oracle, known exactly how to draw him out, which meant someone in his trusted circle had betrayed him. Marcus reached the ground floor and kept going, pushing through the door marked Basement Access, Authorized Personnel Only. The sublevel was a maze of storage rooms and mechanical equipment pipes and ventilation ducts, creating an industrial labyrinth beneath the polished corporate world above. Rosa, how long have you known Miguel? Silence on the radio, then carefully, about 6 months. Why? How did Dr. Sarah meet him? She treated his daughter. Marcus, what are you thinking? Marcus was thinking that Miguel had been too eager to help, too knowledgeable about security procedures, too convenient. He was thinking that Sarah had access to databases that could reveal his true identity. He was thinking that Rosa's brother Luis worked for the FBI and might have loyalties that superseded family bonds. He was thinking that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. The loading dock lay at the end of a corridor, lined with storage cages and abandoned equipment. Marcus could see the exit, a roll-up door that would lead to the alley behind the building. Freedom if he could reach it. Movement on your 6, Rosa's voice crackled. 2 signatures coming down the stairs. Marcus broke into a sprint, but the corridor was longer than it appeared, and his pursuers had the advantage of knowing the building's layout. He was still 50 feet from the loading dock when they emerged from the stairwell behind him. Stop! The command echoed off concrete walls with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. There's nowhere to run, Mr. Chen. Marcus kept running. In his peripheral vision, he caught a glimpse of his pursuers. Black tactical gear, professional weapons, faces hidden behind military-grade night vision equipment. Not corporate security, not even police. These were soldiers, or something close enough to make no difference. A gunshot exploded in the confined space, the bullet spanging off a concrete pillar inches from Marcus's head. The message was clear: they wanted him alive, but only if he cooperated. Marcus reached the loading dock and grabbed the handle of the roll-up door. It didn't budge. Electronic lock controlled from a central security station that had undoubtedly been compromised along with everything else. Trapped. Marcus turned to face his pursuers, clutching the laptop like a talisman. Two figures in tactical gear approached with weapons raised but not quite aimed. Professional courtesy for a man they wanted to capture rather than kill. Mr. Chen, the lead figure said, voice distorted by electronic modulation. You've caused a great deal of trouble for some very important people. I imagine I have, though apparently not as much trouble as I'm going to cause. The soldier laughed, a sound like grinding metal. You think that laptop matters? You think downloading your old code is going to change anything? Marcus felt cold realization creeping up his spine. You wanted me to take it. We wanted you to try. Do you really think your corporate security was so lax that a homeless man with a mop bucket could just walk into your former laboratory? Do you think your faithful cleaning crew contact was a coincidence? Miguel, it had been Miguel from the beginning, feeding information to handlers who'd been watching and waiting for Marcus to surface. Dr. Sarah's contact, Rosa's inside man, the perfect vector for drawing him into a trap he'd walked into with eyes wide open. The laptop's been compromised, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Completely. Every file you downloaded has been modified, every algorithm corrupted. Even if you could get that information to authorities, it would only confirm that Oracle is exactly what we say it is. A harmless behavioral prediction system with appropriate privacy safeguards. Marcus wanted to smash the laptop against the concrete floor, but he forced himself to remain calm. Think. There had to be something they'd missed. Some advantage they hadn't anticipated. What do you want? Complete cooperation. Public endorsement of Oracle as the revolutionary advancement you always intended it to be. A few media appearances to smooth over any lingering concerns about the transition of leadership after your tragic death and miraculous resurrection. And if I refuse, the second soldier stepped forward, raising a tablet that displayed surveillance footage from the warehouse in Georgetown. Rosa at her computer, Jazz tuning his saxophone, Dr. Sarah organizing medical supplies. Your homeless friends won't be homeless much longer, the first soldier said. They'll be dead, along with anyone else who's helped you since your unfortunate accident. Marcus stared at the screen, watching his friends and allies going about their business, unaware that their lives hung in the balance of decisions being made in a basement loading dock. People who'd shown him kindness when he had nothing to offer in return. People who'd trusted his story and risked everything to help him reclaim what had been stolen. You have until tomorrow morning to decide, the soldier continued. 8 a.m. press conference. Neuralink headquarters. You'll stand beside David Park and Katherine Chen and tell the world that Oracle represents the future of human-computer interaction. And if I don't, then the future becomes very dark for everyone you care about. The soldiers began backing toward the quarter weapons still trained on Marcus, but their body language suggesting the immediate threat was over. They delivered their message. Now they would let time and guilt do the rest of their work. Oh, and Mr. Chen, the lead soldier called over his shoulder, don't bother trying to warn your friends. We're already watching them. Any attempt to evacuate or relocate will be interpreted as non-compliance. Then they were gone, leaving Marcus alone in the loading dock with a laptop full of poisoned data and 8 hours to choose between his principles and the lives of everyone who'd helped him remember what those principles were worth fighting for. Marcus sank onto a storage crate and put his head in his hands. For the first time since waking up beside the Sammamish River, he wished he'd never remembered who he used to be. Being nobody had been simpler. Being nobody had been safe. But being nobody had also meant letting Oracle's corruption spread unchecked through the world, reprogramming human civilization one manipulated decision at a time. Marcus lifted his head and looked at the laptop in his hands. Corrupted data, but still his creation, still built on foundations that he understood better than anyone else alive. Maybe there was a third option. Maybe the game wasn't over yet. Marcus stood up and began walking back toward the corridor, his mind already working through possibilities that his captors had dismissed as impossible. After all, they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed that Marcus Chen was the only identity he could use. But he'd learned to be someone else, someone invisible, someone who could move through the world without leaving traces, someone who understood systems from the outside rather than the inside, someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Mark was going to pay Marcus's debts, and the collection process was going to be very, very interesting. Marcus made it back to the warehouse by dawn, slipping through Georgetown's industrial maze like a ghost returning to haunt familiar territory. The building looked exactly as he'd left it, but something felt wrong. A quality of silence that suggested held breath rather than peaceful sleep. He found them in the main room sitting with the careful stillness of people who knew they were being watched. Rosa had her computer set up but not typing. Jazz with his saxophone but not playing. Dr. Sarah organizing medical supplies with the mechanical precision of someone trying to look busy while thinking about something else entirely. "We need to talk," Marcus said without preamble. Rosa looked up from her screen, and Marcus saw knowledge in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Yes, we do." Sarah set down her supply box and fixed Marcus with the kind of direct stare that suggested medical training had taught her to see through elaborate deceptions. "How long have you known?" "Known what?" "That they've been watching us from the beginning, that our little resistance movement was exactly what they wanted us to build." Marcus felt the last of his naive optimism crumble into dust. "How long have you known?" "About an hour after you left for Neuralink," Jazz said, his voice carrying undertones of barely controlled anger. "Funny thing about surveillance equipment, when you know what to look for, it's not that hard to spot." Rosa turned her laptop so Marcus could see the screen. Surveillance footage from inside the warehouse shot from multiple angles with professional-grade equipment. Every conversation they'd had, every plan they'd made, every moment of trust and growing friendship had been recorded and transmitted to handlers who'd been playing them like a symphony orchestra. "Miguel?" Marcus asked. "Miguel's daughter never needed surgery," Dr. Sarah replied. "I checked with the hospital where she's supposedly being treated. No record of her ever being a patient there. No record of her existing at all." Marcus sank into a chair that creaked under the weight of his exhaustion and growing despair. "So they've known everything from the beginning." "Not everything," Rosa said, a note of satisfaction creeping into her voice. "They knew we were building a team. They knew you were trying to access Oracle's source code. They knew we were planning some kind of counter-operation. But they didn't know about this," Jazz added, producing a small device that looked like a cross between a smartphone and a radio scanner. Marcus studied the device, his programmer's eye recognizing sophisticated electronics wrapped in a deliberately crude package. "What is it?" "Your girlfriend, Dr. Sarah, turns out to have some interesting connections," Jazz explained. "Tell him, Doc." Sarah looked uncomfortable, like someone who'd been keeping secrets for good reasons, but had run out of ways to justify the deception. "My brother works for the NSA, Cybersecurity Division. When I started documenting your memory recovery and the evidence about Oracle, I sent copies to him as an insurance policy." "Without telling us," Rosa pointed out. "Without telling you," Dr. Sarah agreed, "because I needed someone in government to know what we were dealing with, and I needed plausible deniability if things went wrong." Marcus turned the device over in his hands, noting the military-grade construction and the kind of encryption hardware that costs more than most people's cars. "And this is what a secure communication link. Direct line to a joint NSA-FBI task force that's been investigating foreign influence in American technology companies," Dr. Sarah explained. "They've been watching Neuralink for months, but they needed inside information to build a case. Your resurrection and the evidence you've gathered represents the break they've been waiting for." "So we're not alone," Marcus said. "We're not alone," Rosa confirmed, "but we're also not in charge anymore. The moment you accessed Oracle's source code last night, you triggered national security protocols that are bigger than corporate espionage. This isn't just about stolen technology. It's about hostile foreign actors using American innovation to reprogram human behavior on a global scale. Jazz pulled out his saxophone and began assembling it with practiced efficiency. Which brings us to the interesting part of our morning briefing. Dr. Sarah activated the secure device, and the warehouse filled with the electronic squeal of encrypted communications establishing connection. When the noise subsided, a new voice joined their conversation, older, authoritative, carrying the weight of institutional power. Mr. Chen, this is Deputy Director Harrison, NSA Cybersecurity. I understand you've had an eventful evening. Marcus found himself straightening despite his exhaustion. That's one way to put it. We've been monitoring the situation at Neuralink for several months. What we didn't anticipate was that the company's founder would rise from the dead to hand us the evidence we needed. How much do you know? More than your captors think, less than we need to build an airtight case. Oracle isn't just surveillance software. It's a social engineering platform designed to influence political outcomes, purchasing decisions, and social relationships on a massive scale. The technology is being sold to foreign intelligence services, private military contractors, and what we believe to be a consortium of authoritarian governments. Marcus felt a familiar chill. How massive? Current estimates suggest Oracle's influence network reaches approximately 200 million users across 37 countries. The system's been operational for 6 months, running experiments in behavioral modification that make previous efforts look like children's toys. Rosa whistled softly. 200 million people. And growing exponentially. Every social media platform, every news aggregator, every recommendation algorithm that Oracle touches becomes a vector for influence. Within 2 years, the system could theoretically shape the thinking of half the world's internet-connected population. Marcus stared at the device in his hands, trying to process the scale of what his creation had become. What do you need from me? Public testimony, technical documentation that proves Oracle's true capabilities, and most importantly, your cooperation in a joint operation to expose the conspiracy and shut down the network. The people who captured me last night said they'd kill my friends if I don't cooperate with their press conference. The people who captured you last night made a critical error, Deputy Director Harrison replied. They assumed we weren't already watching them watch you. As of 20 minutes ago, the tactical team that threatened you is in federal custody. Marcus felt a spark of hope for the first time since discovering the scope of the betrayal. And David Park, Katherine, still at large but not for long. We're moving simultaneously on multiple fronts: financial crimes, technology, theft, conspiracy to commit espionage. By the time Oracle's true nature becomes public knowledge, everyone involved in its corruption will be facing federal charges. Jazz finished assembling his saxophone and played a few experimental notes. Something that sounded almost like hope set to music. So what's the plan? Mr. Chen holds his press conference as scheduled, but instead of endorsing Oracle, he exposes it. We'll have technical teams standing by to shut down the influence network the moment he begins speaking. Financial teams will freeze assets. Arrest teams will move on all primary targets simultaneously. And if something goes wrong, Dr. Sarah asked, then we're all in trouble that's bigger than individual lives. Deputy Director Harrison replied with the brutal honesty of someone who'd spent his career dealing with existential threats. Oracle represents the weaponization of human psychology on an unprecedented scale. If we can't stop it now, we may not get another chance. Marcus stood up, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a familiar coat. He'd created Oracle to help humanity make better decisions. Instead, he'd built the perfect tool for those who wanted to make decisions for humanity. At AM press conference, and he said, "I'll be there." Mr. Chen, the Deputy Director Harrison's voice carried a note of warning. You understand that this operation carries significant personal risk. David Park and Katherine Chen have already demonstrated their willingness to commit murder to protect their interests. I understand. And you understand that success isn't guaranteed. Oracle's influence network is more sophisticated and more deeply embedded than anything we've encountered before. Even if we shut down the primary system's backup networks and dormant protocols could remain operational. I understand that too. Marcus looked around the warehouse at the people who'd helped him remember who he was supposed to be. Rosa, whose programming skills had made their investigation possible. Jazz, whose music had reminded him that beauty could exist even in the darkest places. Dr. Sarah, whose medical training had helped heal more than just his physical injuries. They'd all risked everything to help a stranger with an impossible story. Now he was asking them to risk everything again to stop a nightmare they'd helped him discover. "We're with you," Rosa said as if reading his thoughts. "All the way." "Damn right we are," Jazz added, running through a complex scale that sounded like defiance set to music. Sarah just nodded, but her expression carried the kind of determined certainty that had probably gotten her through medical school and kept her working with homeless populations when easier options were available. Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since waking up beside the Sammamish River. He felt like part of a team. Not the kind of corporate collaboration that had defined his previous life, but the deeper bond that came from people choosing to stand together when standing alone would be safer. 8 a.m., he repeated. "Let's go save the world." Outside the warehouse windows, dawn was breaking over Elliott Bay, painting the sky in shades of gold and possibility. Somewhere across the city, David Park and Katherine Chen were probably preparing for their moment of triumph, unaware that their carefully constructed conspiracy was about to collapse around them. Somewhere else, federal agents were moving into position ready to execute an operation that would either preserve human free will or fail spectacularly in front of a global audience. And in a converted warehouse in Georgetown, a dead man and his unlikely allies were preparing to prove that some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds of success were measured in single digits. Marcus touched the key in his pocket one last time, the key that had opened doors he'd thought were forever closed. In a few hours, he would either save his creation from corruption or watch it destroy everything he'd ever cared about. Either way, the man who'd built Oracle was finally ready to face what it had become. The Neuralink building looked different in the morning light, less like a temple to innovation and more like a fortress under siege. Federal agents in unmarked vehicles had established perimeters at strategic points throughout downtown Seattle, while news vans from major networks began gathering in the plaza outside the main entrance. Marcus watched from a coffee shop across the street, nursing a cup of overpriced espresso and trying to ignore the fact that his hands were shaking. He'd cleaned up as much as possible, borrowed clothes from Jazz, a shave and haircut courtesy of Dr. Sarah's precision, with medical instruments, enough grooming to transform him from homeless Mark back into someone who might plausibly be the presumed dead CEO of a technology company. But transformation was more than appearance. Marcus felt like he was wearing a costume of his former self, playing a role in a production where the script called for him to either save the world or die trying. "Nervous?" Rose's voice crackled through the nearly invisible earpiece Dr. Sarah's NSA brother had provided. "Terrified," Marcus replied, vocalizing so other coffee shop patrons wouldn't notice him talking to himself. "Good. Means you're taking this seriously." Marcus could see the main entrance to the Neuralink building from his window seat. David Park had arrived 15 minutes earlier, moving with the confident stride of someone anticipating victory. Katherine followed shortly after, elegant, in black, playing her role as the grieving widow who'd found the strength to carry on her late husband's work. They had no idea what was coming. Neither Marcus realized it. "Audio check," came Deputy Director Harrison's voice through the earpiece. "Mr. Chen, we're showing all systems operational. Technical teams are in position to initiate Oracle's shutdown on your signal." "What's the signal?" "When you begin speaking about Oracle's true capabilities, our monitoring systems will detect specific keywords and phrases. The shutdown sequence will activate automatically." Marcus finished his coffee and stood up, feeling like a man walking toward his own execution. The street between the coffee shop and the Neuralink building might as well have been a mile wide, patrolled by invisible predators and watched by eyes that saw everything. "One more thing," Dr. Sarah's voice joined the communication loop. "We've been monitoring David's communications. He received a call from Shanghai about 20 minutes ago. Whatever they discussed, it changed his demeanor significantly." "Changed how?" "He went from confident to desperate. The body language analysis suggests he's now operating under some kind of deadline or ultimatum." Marcus felt cold realization creeping up his spine. "They're not planning to wait for the press conference." "What do you mean?" "Think about it. If Oracle's influence network is already operational, if they've already extracted maximum value from the technology, why risk a public demonstration? Why give me a platform to expose them?" Marcus was walking as he talked, crossing the street with the steady pace of someone who'd made an irrevocable decision. The federal agents in unmarked vehicles would be tracking his movement, but so would other watchers, the kind who demonstrated their willingness to commit murder to protect their interests. Retry JN, continue edit. Because they're not planning for me to survive the press conference. Marcus continued, his voice barely audible as he approached the Neuralink building. This isn't about getting my endorsement. This is about eliminating the only person who can expose Oracle's true nature. Marcus, abort. Deputy Director Harrison's voice cut through the communication loop with military urgency. We're moving to Plan B. Extraction team is en route to your position. No. Marcus reached the plaza in front of the building where early arriving reporters were setting up equipment for what they thought would be a routine technology announcement. If I run now, they'll disappear. David and Katherine will activate whatever endgame they've been planning, and Oracle's influence network will become permanent infrastructure. Marcus could see David Park through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the lobby, speaking animatedly into his phone, while Katherine stood nearby with the rigid posture of someone under extreme stress. Whatever orders they'd received from Shanghai, the timeline had definitely accelerated. Mr. Chen, we have solid intelligence suggesting this is a trap designed to eliminate you publicly. The risk is acceptable, Marcus interrupted, pushing through the revolving door into the Neuralink lobby. Because the alternative is letting Oracle reprogram human civilization. The lobby felt like a museum dedicated to his former life. Corporate awards and display cases, photographs of product launches and innovation summits, a bronze sculpture that represented the intersection of human potential and technological advancement, pretentious art that had cost more than most people's annual salaries. David Park looked up as Marcus entered, and for just a moment, his carefully controlled expression slipped. Surprise, fear, and something that looked almost like relief. Marcus, David's voice carried across the marble-floored space with the warmth of an old friend greeting a colleague he'd thought was dead. My God, when we heard you were alive, it's a miracle. The performance was flawless. If Marcus hadn't known about the conspiracy, hadn't seen the evidence of betrayal and corruption, he might have believed that David's emotion was genuine. Katherine's reaction was more controlled. A slight widening of the eyes, a carefully modulated gasp of surprise, the kind of response an actor might give when they'd rehearsed the scene but hadn't quite perfected the timing. David, Katherine. Marcus approached them with the steady gait of someone who'd learned to project confidence even when feeling none. I understand there's a press conference. Yes, of course. David's smile was warm enough to melt glaciers. The world needs to hear from Oracle's creator, needs to understand the vision behind the technology. The vision, Marcus repeated. Yes, I think that's exactly what people need to understand. Katherine stepped forward, and for a moment Marcus thought she might actually embrace him. The grieving widow reunited with her miraculously restored husband. It would make compelling television. Instead, she stopped just outside arm's reach, studying his face with the clinical interest of someone evaluating a potentially valuable commodity. You look different, she said. Thinner, older. Living on the streets will do that to a person. Yes, I imagine it would. Katherine's tone carried just the right note of sympathy tinged with distaste. Well, you're home now. That's what matters. Home. Marcus looked around the lobby of the company he'd built, surrounded by monuments to innovations he'd created, standing next to people who'd murdered him and stolen everything he'd ever cared about. Home had never felt less like home. The press conference is set for the main auditorium, David said, checking his watch with the nervous energy of someone operating under an immutable deadline. We should probably get you briefed on the presentation materials. That won't be necessary, Marcus replied. I know exactly what I want to say about Oracle. Something flickered behind David's eyes, a moment of uncertainty that suggested his handlers in Shanghai had prepared him for multiple scenarios, but not quite this one. Marcus, Katherine's voice carried the tone she'd always used when she thought he was being unreasonable. This is an important moment for the company, for your legacy. We need to make sure the message is properly coordinated. I'm sure we do. Marcus was scanning the lobby as they talked, noting the positions of security cameras' exit routes and the subtle bulges under the jackets of men who were trying very hard to look like corporate executives. The building had been turned into a killing ground, but one that would provide plausible deniability for whatever they were planning. Shall we head upstairs? David gestured toward the elevators with the forced cheerfulness of a tour guide showing visitors through a haunted house. Actually, Marcus said, I think we should talk here first, all three of us, about what really happened to Oracle. David's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Marcus, this isn't the time or place for what? For honesty, for discussing how my creation has been corrupted into a tool for behavioral manipulation and social control. The lobby fell silent except for the soft hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic from the street outside. Katherine and David exchanged a look that confirmed everything Marcus had suspected about their relationship and their shared guilt. I'm not sure what you mean, Katherine said carefully. I mean, Oracle isn't predicting human behavior. It's programming it. I mean, the influence network you've built reaches 200 million users and growing. I mean, you've sold American technology to foreign intelligence services and private military contractors. David's mask finally slipped completely. You don't understand the forces involved here, Marcus. This is bigger than one company, bigger than one country. Oracle represents evolution, the next step in human social organization. Evolution. Marcus felt anger rising in his throat like molten metal. You call mass psychological manipulation evolution? I call it necessary, Katherine interjected. Democracy is chaos, Marcus. Free will is inefficient. People make terrible decisions when left to their own devices. Oracle provides guidance, structure, optimization of human potential. Marcus stared at his wife, his former wife, his would-be murderer, his philosophical opposite, and realized that this conversation was being recorded by multiple parties for multiple purposes. The federal agents monitoring his earpiece, the corporate security systems David had installed throughout the building, and quite possibly the foreign handlers who turned Oracle into a weapon, which meant his next words would either trigger the salvation or damnation of human free will. You're absolutely right, Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the marble lobby. People do make terrible decisions when left to their own devices, like the decision to trust you, like the decision to build Oracle without sufficient safeguards against exactly this kind of corruption. He paused, looking directly into the nearest security camera. But the worst decision of all would be letting you get away with it. The silence that followed Marcus's words felt like the moment between lightning and thunder, pregnant with invisible energy waiting for the universe to catch up with what had already been set in motion. Then the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing the Neuralink lobby in the red glow of backup systems, but Marcus could hear the deeper silence that indicated Oracle's primary servers had just been disconnected from the global internet. Somewhere in government facilities across the country, technical teams were executing shutdown protocols that would sever Oracle's influence network like a surgeon cutting out a malignant tumor. What did you do? David's voice carried the kind of panic that came from watching carefully laid plans crumble in real time. What I should have done the day I created Oracle, Marcus replied. I made sure it couldn't be used to hurt people. Katherine was already moving her elegant black dress, no impediment to the fluid motion of someone who'd prepared for exactly this contingency. She produced a small device from her purse. Not a weapon, but something that looked like a cross between a smartphone and a radio transmitter. Shanghai, this is Katherine. Execute Contingency Protocol 7. Repeat, execute Contingency Protocol 7. Marcus felt cold realization wash over him. Backup systems. Did you really think we'd put all our eggs in one basket? David's composure was returning as emergency protocols kicked in. Oracle's primary network may be down, but the secondary systems are distributed across 17 countries. The influence matrix will be back online within the hour. And by then, Katherine added, checking her watch, this inconvenient resurrection will have been resolved permanently. The men with subtle bulges under their jackets were no longer trying to look like corporate executives. They moved with the efficient purpose of professionals executing a well-rehearsed plan, forming a perimeter that would contain the situation while making it look like they were responding to an emergency. Marcus touched his earpiece but heard only static. The federal agents monitoring his communications had been jammed or blocked, leaving him alone in a building that had been transformed into an execution chamber. But he wasn't quite alone. "Excuse me," came a voice from the lobby entrance. "I'm looking for Marcus Chen." Everyone turned toward the interruption. A young woman with a camera bag slung over her shoulder and the kind of determined expression that suggested she'd walked through multiple layers of security to get here. She was maybe 17 with Asian features in Marcus's eyes. Emma, his daughter, the child who'd been documenting Seattle's homeless population while her father learned what it meant to be invisible. Emma, Katherine's voice carried warning and threat in equal measure. You shouldn't be here. Probably not, Emma agreed, continuing across the lobby with the fearless stride of someone who'd grown up in a world where authority was just another word for people who thought they knew better. But when the FBI calls to tell you your dead father is about to expose a massive conspiracy, it seems like the kind of thing you should witness personally. Marcus felt his heart stop. The FBI called you. About an hour ago, Agent Harrison said you might need backup. Emma pulled out her phone and began recording. I'm live streaming to 17 different platforms simultaneously. Hi, Dad. Thanks for not being dead. The subtle-looking corporate executives were no longer looking subtle. Their weapons were visible now, but so were the news vans outside and the federal agents who were probably watching the live stream, along with thousands of other people who tuned in to watch a technology announcement and were now witnessing something that looked very much like a hostage situation. Emma, you need to leave, Marcus said. This is dangerous. More dangerous than letting these people reprogram human civilization. Emma's camera was capturing everything. The armed men, Katherine's transmitter, David's expression of growing desperation. I've been documenting Oracle's effects for months. The homeless people I've been photographing, half of them are former tech workers who asked too many questions about behavioral modification research. David was speaking rapidly into his own communication device, trying to coordinate with handlers who were probably dealing with similar chaos in multiple time zones. Katherine moved toward Emma with the predatory grace of someone who decided that loose ends needed to be eliminated regardless of familial connections. Katherine, don't. Marcus stepped between his wife and daughter. She's just a kid. She's a witness, Katherine replied. And witnesses are liabilities we can't afford. Touch her and I'll make sure Oracle never comes back online, Marcus said. Not the primary system, not the backup networks, not any of it. You don't have that kind of access anymore. Don't I? Marcus pulled out the laptop Rosa had given him, the one that supposedly contained corrupted data from his infiltration of the Neuralink building. But Rosa was smarter than their captors had given her credit for, and corrupted data could be uncorrupted by someone who knew the right algorithms. Oracle's architecture is based on neural networks that require constant parameter adjustment. Marcus explained, his fingers moving across the keyboard with the precision of a pianist performing a familiar sonata. The system learns by monitoring its own effectiveness and modifying its influence protocols accordingly. So what? David demanded. So I built a kill switch into the core learning algorithms, a command sequence that causes the neural networks to enter recursive loops that consume processing power without generating useful output. The backup systems you're so proud of, they're all running modified versions of my original code. Marcus hit enter. Around the world in server farms and data centers from Shanghai to Sao Paulo, Oracle's backup systems began chewing through their own code like digital snakes eating their own tails. The secondary networks that were supposed to maintain the influence matrix started consuming processing power at exponential rates, overwhelming cooling systems and triggering emergency shutdowns that would take weeks to repair. You're bluffing, Katherine said, but her voice carried less certainty than her words. Am I? Marcus turned the laptop so she could see the screen. Real-time monitoring data from Oracle installations worldwide, each one showing the same pattern systems, failing networks, collapsing carefully constructed influence matrices, dissolving into digital static. Oracle is done, Marcus continued. Not just down, but destroyed. Every backup system, every redundant network, every carefully hidden protocol. All of it is feeding on itself until there's nothing left but empty servers and corrupted data. David stared at the screen with the expression of someone watching his life's work disappear in real time. You don't understand what you've done. The people we work for, the organizations that have invested in this technology, they won't just write this off as a business loss. Probably not, Marcus agreed, but they'll have to build something entirely new rather than corrupting what I already created. And next time, maybe the people building it will think twice about who they're really working for. Katherine raised her transmitter again, But before she could speak, the lobby filled with the sound of federal agents executing a synchronized entry. The subtle-looking corporate executives found themselves outnumbered and outgunned by people who'd been planning this operation for months, rather than improvising responses to unexpected complications. David Park, Katherine Chen, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit espionage, technology theft, and attempted murder, announced a woman in tactical gear who moved with the kind of authority that came from actually being in charge rather than just pretending to be. As handcuffs clicked and Miranda rights were recited, Marcus found himself standing beside his daughter in the lobby of a company that no longer existed, watching the arrest of people who tried to reprogram human civilization for profit. "So," Emma said, still recording everything for her 17 live streaming platforms, "this is probably not how you imagined your family reunion would go." Marcus laughed, the first genuine laughter he'd experienced since waking up beside the Sammamish River. "Actually, I couldn't have imagined any of this." "What happens now?" Marcus looked around the lobby of Neuralink Dynamics at the awards and photographs in pretentious art that represented everything he'd thought success looked like. Then he looked at his daughter, who'd risked her life to document truth and bear witness to justice. "Now we figure out what comes next," he said. "Together." Outside the Neuralink building, news crews were broadcasting the collapse of Oracle to a world that was only beginning to understand how close it had come to losing its capacity for independent thought. Federal agents were coordinating with international partners to shut down the last vestiges of the influence network and track down everyone who'd participated in its construction. And in Georgetown, in a warehouse that had served as headquarters for an impossible mission, Rosa and Jazz and Dr. Sarah were monitoring the feeds and confirming that Oracle's kill switch had worked exactly as Marcus had designed it. The war for human free will was over. The work of rebuilding it was just beginning. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the main hall of the renovated Georgetown warehouse, watching Rosa put the finishing touches on a presentation that would have been impossible to imagine during the dark days of Oracle's influence network. The warehouse had been transformed from a homeless shelter into something unprecedented. The Institute for Ethical Technology Development, a nonprofit organization dedicated to ensuring that artificial intelligence served humanity rather than controlling it. The funding had come from an unexpected source: the sale of Neuralink's legitimate intellectual property, combined with settlement funds from the international corporations that had unknowingly participated in Oracle's corruption. "You ready for this?" Jazz asked, tuning his saxophone in preparation for what had become their traditional opening ceremony music. He'd been hired as the Institute's first artist in residence, a position created specifically to ensure that technological development included perspectives from outside the traditional engineering community. "As ready as anyone can be for congressional testimony," Marcus replied. He was scheduled to appear before the House Subcommittee on Technology and Innovation later that week, helping lawmakers understand the implications of Oracle's rise and fall for national security and human rights. Dr. Sarah entered carrying coffee and the kind of complex scheduling documents that had become necessary as the Institute's work expanded beyond their original Seattle base. She'd been offered a position with the CDC's new Division of Digital Public Health, but had chosen to stay with the Institute as Chief Medical Officer, ensuring that future AI development included considerations for psychological and social well-being. "How many delegations are we expecting?" Marcus asked, reviewing the guest list for today's International Symposium on AI Ethics. 47 countries plus representatives from the UN, the European Union, and about 20 major technology companies, Sarah replied. "Oh, and Emma's documentary crew will be filming everything for her Netflix series." Marcus smiled. Emma's documentary about Oracle's influence network had become a global phenomenon, combining investigative journalism with personal narrative in a way that made complex technological issues accessible to general audiences. The series had won 3 Emmy Awards and launched Emma's career as a filmmaker, but more importantly, it had educated millions of people about the importance of maintaining human agency in an age of increasingly sophisticated AI systems. "Any word from Katherine and David's trials?" Rosa asked, joining the group with a tablet full of technical specifications for the Institute's latest project. "David's cooperation with the international investigation earned him a reduced sentence," Marcus replied. 15 years instead of life. Katherine chose to fight the charges. The jury wasn't sympathetic to her arguments about optimization and efficiency. Katherine Chen was serving a life sentence in federal prison, still maintaining that Oracle represented the future of human social organization and that her only crime was being ahead of her time. David Park had provided testimony that helped dismantle the international network of corporations and intelligence agencies that had funded Oracle's development, earning him protective custody and a chance at eventual parole. "And Henry?" Dr. Sarah asked. Marcus's expression softened. His grandfather had recovered from the systematic poisoning, though the experience had left him frailer than his 85 years suggested. Henry Chen now served as the Institute's chairman emeritus, providing historical perspective on technology development and occasionally startling young engineers with stories about computing before the internet. "He's in the garden with Daniel," Marcus replied, teaching him about hardware design from first principles. Daniel had been the most challenging family relationship to rebuild. Catherine's systematic alienation had convinced the 14-year-old that his father was responsible for every unhappiness in their family, and learning the truth about his mother's crimes had been devastating. But slowly, carefully, with the help of family therapists who specialized in trauma recovery, Marcus and Daniel were constructing a relationship based on honesty rather than manipulation. 5 minutes to opening ceremony," announced a volunteer coordinator whose job had become necessary as the Institute's work attracted global attention. Marcus looked around the warehouse that had saved his life and launched his second career. The homeless encampment had been replaced by conference facilities, but the spirit of mutual aid and collaborative problem-solving remained. Many of the Institute's staff members were former homeless individuals who'd been trained in technology development, bringing perspectives that traditional Silicon Valley recruiting had never considered. The main doors opened and delegates began filing in. Government officials, technology executives, academic researchers, and civil rights advocates from around the world. They were here to discuss the Geneva Protocols on Artificial Intelligence, an international treaty that would establish binding standards for AI development based on lessons learned from Oracle's near miss with global influence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly across the renovated warehouse. "Welcome to the Institute for Ethical Technology Development. 6 months ago, the world narrowly avoided a future where artificial intelligence was used to manipulate rather than assist human decision-making. Today, we begin the work of ensuring that future AI development serves human flourishing rather than controlling it." Jazz's saxophone provided a musical backdrop as Marcus outlined the Institute's vision technology development that included diverse perspectives from the beginning, rather than as an afterthought. AI systems designed with human agency as a core value rather than an inconvenient limitation, and international cooperation to prevent the weaponization of social media and behavioral prediction. The Oracle crisis taught us that the question isn't whether AI will change human civilization, Marcus continued. The question is whether that change will expand human potential or diminish it, whether technology will be a tool for liberation or a mechanism for control. In the audience, representatives from 47 countries took notes that would inform legislation and treaty negotiations for years to come. Technology executives scribbled ideas for development practices that would become industry standards. Academics began planning research projects that would explore the intersection of artificial intelligence and human rights. But Marcus was thinking about smaller victories. Rosa's programming bootcamp for homeless individuals, which had achieved a 90% job placement rate. Jazz's music therapy sessions, which used artificial intelligence to help trauma survivors process their experiences. Dr. Sarah's mobile health clinics, which employed AI diagnostic tools to provide medical care in underserved communities. Emma's voice came from the back of the room as she wrapped up her documentary filming. And that's a wrap on the first International Symposium on AI Ethics and Human Rights. This is Emma Chen reporting from Seattle, where the future of technology is being written by people who remember what it means to be human. After the delegates departed and the camera crews packed up their equipment, Marcus found himself alone in the warehouse with the people who'd helped him remember who he was supposed to be. Rosa was already planning the next day's programming workshops. Jazz was composing music for an AI-assisted composition project that would premiere at Carnegie Hall. Dr. Sarah was reviewing medical protocols for refugee camps that would use AI to provide health care in crisis situations. Any regrets? Rosa asked as they locked up the building for the night. Marcus considered the question seriously. He'd lost his first company, his marriage, and his illusions about the inherent goodness of technological progress. But he gained something more valuable, the knowledge that technology was only as ethical as the people who built it, and that building it right required perspectives from everyone it would affect. No regrets, Marcus said, but lots of work still to do. Outside the warehouse, Seattle's skyline glittered with the lights of a city that had learned to be more careful about the intersection of innovation and human welfare. In server farms around the world, AI systems processed data and made recommendations based on protocols that prioritize human agency over efficiency, transparency over optimization. Oracle was gone, but its legacy lived on in the safeguards and principles that would guide the next generation of artificial intelligence development. The war for human free will had been won, but the work of protecting it would continue for as long as humans and machines shared the same world. Marcus walked home through streets he'd once wandered as a homeless man, past doorways where he'd slept, and corners where he'd begged for change. The city looked different now, not because it had changed, but because he had learned to see it from multiple perspectives. At home, Daniel was practicing piano while Henry told stories about the early days of computing. Emma was editing footage for her next documentary project. Dr. Sarah was reading medical journals by lamplight, preparing for tomorrow's clinic visits. It was Marcus realized exactly the kind of life worth building technology to protect. The man who had fallen from grace and risen from the dead had finally learned the most important lesson Oracle could never teach, that the future belonged to whoever had the wisdom to include everyone in building it. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor, each droplet exploding like tiny grenades against the glass. Marcus Chen stood silhouetted against the Seattle skyline, his reflection ghostlike in the storm-darkened window. The city sprawled below him, a constellation of ambition and broken dreams, and tonight he couldn't tell which category he belonged to. His phone buzzed. Katherine's name appeared on the screen, but he didn't answer. He knew what she wanted to discuss, the same thing they'd been avoiding for months. The same thing that made his stomach clench every time he looked at her perfectly manicured fingers, the ones that had been sliding wedding rings on and off when she thought he wasn't watching. Mr. Chen, his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. The Oracle presentation materials are ready for tomorrow's board meeting. Tomorrow, the word felt heavy, loaded with possibilities that both thrilled and terrified him. Oracle wasn't just another AI system. It was his masterpiece. A neural network so sophisticated it could predict human behavior patterns with 97% accuracy. It could revolutionize everything from marketing to mental health treatment. It could also, in the wrong hands, become the most dangerous tool for manipulation ever created. Marcus turned from the window, his eyes falling on the legal documents spread across his mahogany desk. Divorce papers on the left, a new will on the right. Both unsigned, both representing a future he wasn't sure he had the courage to claim. The elevator chimed and footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Marcus didn't need to look up to know who it was. David Park's cologne announced him before he appeared, that expensive cloying scent that Katherine had started wearing lately. Working late again? David's voice carried its usual note of concern, the kind that sounded genuine until you realized how often it appeared at convenient moments. Katherine's worried about you. Marcus almost laughed. Katherine worried about many things. Her Pilates instructor's availability, her standing at the country club, whether her latest Botox treatments looked natural. Her husband's well-being had never made the list. I'm sure she is. Marcus gathered the legal papers, sliding them into his briefcase. How did the Oracle security protocols review go? Clean as a whistle, though I still think we should consider the overseas manufacturing option. The Chinese consortium's offer is very generous. There it was. The third time this month, David had pushed for international partnerships. Marcus had built Neuralink Dynamics from nothing, and he'd be damned if he'd hand over his life's work to the highest bidder. Oracle stays domestic. We've discussed this. David's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, your company, your rules. The possessiveness in David's tone set Marcus's teeth on edge. He'd heard that same inflection in Katherine's voice when she talked about their house, their children, their future, as if Marcus were just a convenient accessory in lives they'd already planned without him. Thunder rumbled overhead and Marcus felt an inexplicable urge to leave. Not just the office, everything. The penthouse apartment where Catherine's laughter sounded like breaking glass. The boardroom where David's ambition leaked from every pore. The life he'd built that felt increasingly like a prison. "I'm heading home," he said, though home was the last place he wanted to be. "In this weather, Marcus, the roads are... I'll be fine." Marcus grabbed his coat and briefcase, leaving David standing in the empty office like a specter in an expensive suit. The elevator carried him down through floors of sleeping cubicles and darkened conference rooms, past the security desk where Pete gave him a worried wave. "Careful out there, Mr. Chen. They're saying this storm's the worst we've had in years." The parking garage felt like a tomb, his footsteps echoing off concrete walls that wept with condensation. His Tesla sat in its designated spot, sleek and silent as a waiting predator. He'd bought it because Katherine said it made them look environmentally conscious. Now it just reminded him how many decisions he'd let other people make. The drive through downtown Seattle was surreal. Streets that usually thrummed with late-night energy lay empty, rain turning asphalt into rivers that reflected the neon signs of closed businesses. Marcus found himself taking the long route, avoiding the highway that would take him directly home to Catherine's questions and David's phone calls, and Emma's polite distance and Daniel's confused hurt. His phone rang. Katherine again. This time he answered. "Marcus, where are you?" Emma's been asking, has she... He couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. Emma hadn't asked him a direct question in months, not since she'd started spending all her time on that photography project about Seattle's homeless population. The irony wasn't lost on him. His daughter was documenting the city's forgotten people while living with a man who'd forgotten how to be human. "Don't be like this. We need to talk." "About what, your late nights at the office, the way you and David finish each other's sentences, or should we discuss why you've been moving money into offshore accounts?" Silence. Then carefully, "I don't know what you mean." Marcus almost laughed. Katherine was many things. Ambitious, calculating, ruthlessly intelligent, but she'd never been a good liar. That was probably why she'd outsourced the job to David. "I'm coming home," he said. "We'll talk then." He hung up before she could respond and took the on-ramp to I-90 heading east toward Bellevue. The rain was getting worse, sheets of water turning the windshield into a kaleidoscope, even with the wipers on full speed. Other drivers had the sense to pull over, but Marcus felt oddly calm behind the wheel. For the first time in months, he was completely alone with his thoughts. Oracle would launch tomorrow, assuming the board approved the final protocols. Katherine would get her divorce papers the day after, along with the new will that left everything to a trust fund for Emma and Daniel. David would get a severance package and a strong recommendation to find employment elsewhere. And Marcus would finally be free to figure out who he was without all these people telling him who he should be. The Mercer Island Bridge stretched ahead like a spine of light cutting through the darkness. Marcus accelerated slightly, eager to get this confrontation over with. The Tesla's engine purred with satisfaction, rain streaming off its aerodynamic curves like tears. He was halfway across the bridge when the headlights appeared in his rearview mirror. At first, Marcus thought it was just another late-night driver, someone else brave or foolish enough to venture out in the storm. But the vehicle was gaining fast, too fast for the conditions, and something about its approach made his hands tighten on the steering wheel. The headlights grew larger, brighter, until Marcus could see the outline of a black SUV in his mirrors. It was riding his bumper now, close enough that he could make out the silhouette of the driver, a large figure hunched over the wheel like a bird of prey. Marcus pressed the accelerator, but the Tesla was already at its safe speed for these conditions. The SUV matched his pace effortlessly, staying locked on his rear bumper like a shadow he couldn't shake. His phone buzzed with a text message. Against his better judgment, Marcus glanced down at the screen. "Sorry, old friend, nothing personal." The impact came a second later. The SUV's reinforced front end caught the Tesla's rear quarter panel, perfectly sending Marcus into a spin that felt like slow-motion ballet. The world rotated around him. Bridge lights, dark water, the Seattle skyline tilting at impossible angles. He caught a glimpse of the SUV in his peripheral vision, already pulling away into the night like it had never been there at all. The Tesla hit the guardrail with a sound like a gunshot. Metal screamed against metal, and Marcus felt the barrier give way beneath 2 tons of German engineering and Silicon Valley innovation. For a moment that lasted eternity, the car hung suspended in space, rain and darkness rushing past the windows. Then gravity remembered its job. The fall seemed to take forever. Marcus had time to think about Oracle, about the presentation he'd never give, about Emma's project and Daniel's piano lessons, and the look on Catherine's face when she realized her plan had worked, about his father who died in a hospital bed, holding Marcus's hand, whispering about second chance and the importance of family, about all the chances he'd never taken and all the words he'd never said. The Tesla hit the Mercer Island Canal with the force of a meteorite, sinking immediately into water so cold it felt like liquid nitrogen. The impact shattered every window simultaneously, and Lake Washington came pouring in like it was claiming what had always belonged to it. Marcus fumbled with his seatbelt, but his hands were shaking from cold and shock. The water was already up to his chest, and the car was sinking fast, pulled down by the weight of its own ambition. His briefcase floated past him, legal documents spilling out like confetti at a funeral. The divorce papers, the new will, Oracle's source code backup. All of it dissolving into the dark water, taking his old life with it. His lungs burned as he finally freed himself from the seatbelt, kicking toward what he hoped was up. But the cold water disoriented him, and he couldn't tell which way led to air and which led to the bottom of the canal. His chest felt like it might explode, and bright spots danced at the edges of his vision. When Marcus Chen's head finally broke the surface, he gasped in a lungful of rain and relief. But the current was stronger than he'd expected, pulling him away from the bridge, away from the lights of civilization toward the darker waters downstream. He tried to swim back, but his waterlogged clothes dragged him down like anchors. The last thing he remembered before the darkness took him was the sound of sirens in the distance, growing fainter as the current carried him away from everything he had ever been. Consciousness returned like a slow leak, filling Marcus's awareness drop by drop, until the pain became impossible to ignore. His head felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it, and every breath sent daggers through his ribs. But it was the cold that brought him fully awake, a bone-deep chill that made his teeth chatter uncontrollably. He was lying on rocky ground beside a river that looked nothing like the canal where he'd crashed. Somehow the current had carried him miles downstream, depositing him on the bank like a piece of driftwood. Dawn was breaking over the Cascade Mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that would have been beautiful if Marcus could remember why they mattered. But he couldn't remember. Couldn't remember his name, his life, the reason he was soaked to the bone beside a river. With no memory of how he'd gotten there, the harder he tried to grasp the memories, the more they slipped away like smoke. His pockets were mostly empty. A waterlogged wallet with no identification. The leather had separated and the contents had washed away. Some loose change, and a single key on a ring, though he had no idea what it might open. But tucked into his jacket pocket, protected by the waterproof lining, was something else. A business card, though the ink had run until only one word remained legible. Oracle. Oracle. The word felt important, like a name he should remember, but it brought only fragments. Flashes of computer screens, the smell of coffee, the weight of enormous responsibility. Nothing concrete enough to build a life around. A jogger found him 3 hours later, shivering beside the Sammamish River Trail. She called 911, but by the time the paramedics arrived, the man who had once been Marcus Chen was gone. He'd left only wet footprints leading toward the sprawl of South Seattle, where a person could disappear entirely if they knew how to become invisible. That night, as news reports of tech CEO Marcus Chen's tragic death dominated local media, a homeless man who called himself Mark settled under an overpass in Pioneer Square. He didn't know why he'd chosen that name. It just felt right, like putting on clothes that fit perfectly. Katherine Chen appeared on camera outside the Neuralink building, dressed in black and speaking in carefully modulated tones about her beloved husband's dedication to his work. Behind her, David Park nodded solemnly, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. Marcus would have wanted Oracle to continue, Katherine said, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. It was his dream, and David and I will make sure that dream lives on. The reporter asked about the company's future leadership. The board has full confidence in David's ability to guide Neuralink through this difficult transition, Katherine replied. Marcus trusted him completely. We all did. Mark huddled in a doorway 6 blocks away, watched the broadcast on a smartphone someone had dropped. The faces on the screen meant nothing to him, but something about the woman's performance made his skin crawl. Her grief looked practiced, rehearsed like an actor who'd been playing the same role for months. He turned off the phone and pulled his jacket tighter against the Seattle chill. Whatever life those people were mourning, it wasn't his anymore. He was Mark now, a man with no past in an uncertain future, carrying nothing but loose change and a key that opened doors he couldn't remember. But as he settled in for his first night on the streets, one thought echoed in the hollow spaces where his memories used to be oracle. Whatever it was, whoever he used to be, that word felt like a promise he'd made to someone important. A promise he intended to keep, even if he had to figure out what it meant first.